You are listening to a free version of the Majority Report with Sam Steeder. To support this show and get another 15 minutes of daily program, go to majority.fm, please.
Majority Report is supported by Pitchfork Economics with Nick Hanauer, a weekly podcast that explores why rising income inequality will lead to pitchforks and what we can do about it. Every week, Hanauer is joined by some of the world's most original economic thinkers in a convention-busting exploration of who gets what and why in the American economy. If you want to learn how to make the economy work for all Americans, subscribe to Pitchfork Economics at pitchforkeconomics.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
It is Wednesday, March 27th, 2019. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Elisabeth Rosenthal, journalist, former doctor, author of An American Sickness, How Healthcare Became Big Business, and How You Can Take It Back. Also on the program, speaking of which, the White House assault, or I should say the new White House assault on the ACA shows a decidedly unindependent Attorney General. And in the Senate, Green New Deal blocked. Meanwhile, the House probing Donald Trump will be getting his Deutsche Bank records. A Saudi airstrike in Yemen hits a hospital, kills 7, at least 4 children dead. Federal judge strikes down the North Carolina post-20-week abortion ban that has been in effect for decades. And Joe Biden's Anita Hill problem just keeps getting bigger. LA rideshare drivers strike for a day, and Attorney General Barr claims a White House-edited Mueller report to be released in weeks. Mickey D's waves the white flag on the minimum wage hike. And Betsy DeVos, still horrible. And lastly, Wisconsin judge blogs part of the GOP lame duck law. Mozambique suffers a cholera outbreak. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading today because I was woken up again by my son, my wonderful son, who is going through a stage, I think, right now. What's that? I did not do the pre-roll. I will do that right now. So, I was saying that my son is going through a phase, so that means I can't sleep as much, which means then I have trouble reading things and remembering just even the basic names of people. So, good to see all you. What's up, guys?
Hey, you.
Hey. See you guys here. Great. That's really great. Very happy
We
to
need
see
to
you.
get you to a sleep clinic as soon as possible.
No kidding.
Like, legitimately. This is becoming a problem for all of us. Those goddamn pipes.
I felt the same thing. It wasn't that. No, this morning it was Saul peed his bed at 5 in the morning, and I just get woken up with a scream like, Dad! And then I go in and just, swear at myself, think like, why, what was I thinking? Building him a loft bed. That was dumb. That was super dumb. And then I'm looking around for, I got to clean his sheets and pull his, and then, and then I'm awake and I just sit there. The only upshot is I got the lunch done before they woke up. That was the only upshot. Anyways, folks, you don't need to hear that any more than you've already heard. A lot happening. Obviously, we are still in the wake of the submission of the Mueller report to the Attorney General's office, and unclear what we're going to see and when we're going to see it. If that's the case, certainly there have been deadlines that have been put down by members of the House and the Senate, but Mitch McConnell has blocked it in the Senate, so we shall see what happens next. At one point, I would imagine maybe somebody will leak it. Maybe somebody will get a view at it to get a sense of what, and maybe there's no answers in it in terms of what Mueller's intentions were as to who would resolve questions like obstruction and whatnot. But we will obviously talk about that when and if that happens. In the meantime, the Trump White House decided to end their celebration early by joining in a case that has been that originally the U.S. government was fighting. The Fifth Circuit was the Fifth Circuit Court had ruled that, or is looking, I should say, at a case involving the Affordable Care Act, suggesting that pre-existing conditions should not exist because of the Trump administration ending the mandate or the tax implications if you do not sign up for the ACA. And basically saying that you cannot split off one portion of the law from another. The U.S. government has now joined that case and thinks the entire Affordable Care Act should be essentially enjoined itself. We will talk about this more with our guest, amongst other things, but it's a pretty stunning reversal. Not to mention that the reporting is that the White House overruled the Attorney General on this. Now, if you're familiar with the U.S. government, generally the Justice Department is a little bit more independent than this, but apparently not in this instance. Because the problem, of course, you can see the problem here, right, is that when a law is passed, if the U.S. government doesn't stand aside that law from term to term, unless there is some type of major problem legally with it, it is problematic for the operations of our government. However, from a political standpoint, I don't think that the Democrats could be happier unless Donald Trump literally walked around the front lawn of the White House naked.
It never becomes any less of a disturbing image.
The one thing that this is telling is that for all the talk over the years that, like, Donald Trump is trying to distract us, like there's some type of plan behind his ravings as a madman.
It's two-dimensional chess.
Right. This is actually like less than two-dimensional chess. It really is like, this is him saying, like, I'm going to show you consistently. I'm going to distract you even from the things that I think are good.
It's checkers with being unclear what the rules are.
So this is turning attention, obviously, to health care at the very moment that I think Democrats would want to. All of the research now coming out of the 2018 midterm elections was that the Democrats probably picked up an extra dozen or two seats in the House because of health care. Democrats ran obviously on a whole myriad of issues, but the primary issue in the 2018 election was health care. And this was done at a time when it appeared that the Republicans' assault on the Affordable Care Act was over. So health care is still remains a primary issue. And the real question is how are Democrats and what Democrats are going to propose what proposals? Here's Bernie Sanders on Chris Hayes' program last night, and it's interesting only insofar as that Bernie Sanders sticks with the message and is not going to. I mean, he is running on Medicare-for-all and a very specific proposal about Medicare-for-all that would involve expanding not only who is eligible under Medicare today to everyone, but also expanding essentially what Medicare does. If you're on Medicare now, you pay premiums. They're low relative to other insurance. You have copays in certain instances. It doesn't cover everything. You got to get supplementary insurance. Under his Medicare proposal, Medicare for all proposal, all that goes away. And your coverage is expanded. It is cheaper, and it's available to everyone. And so here is Chris Hayes asking about what about other incremental measures? Would you support those in the near term?
Okay, so you talked about where we should go, so I want to talk about that now. The Democrats introduced legislation in the House today that is focused on some reforms and modifications to Obamacare, particularly people who are in the exchanges who have very high premiums. Do you support the legislation the House produced today?
No, I support the Medicare-for-all single-payer program. Look,
wait, I just want to be clear. So you don't support that incremental reform?
No. The incremental reform that I support is phasing in Medicare for all. First year, we would lower the eligibility age for Medicare from 65 to 55 and cover all of the children. And by the way, expand Medicare coverage for elderly people to include dental care, eyeglasses, and hearing aids. That's the incremental 4-year program that I wrote and that I support.
Right, but I just want to be clear about this. So if that House bill were to come over to the Senate, you would vote against it right now?
Look, right now we are working on what I have fought for my entire life. Health care is a right. It has to be publicly funded. It has to be comprehensive. Right. The current system, Chris, is dysfunctional. It is enormously wasteful. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars every single year on administrative costs, outrageous compensation packages for the CEOs of the insurance and drug companies. Ultimately, we have got to do what every other major country does, and that is guarantee health care to all, do it through public funding, save huge amounts of money in administrative costs. So that's Medicare for all.
Okay, so there's lots of people running on Medicare for all, but there's been some interesting
pause it for 1 second. I just want to point something out here. So the fix to the Affordable Care Act, who knows whether it would pass in the Senate? My guess is it absolutely would not. But let's just assume for a moment that there was actually some viability to this. I mean, the Democrats are doing the right thing by introducing this because they want to get Republicans on the record for specifically voting against, at least in the House, fixing the Affordable Care Act. Because Republicans cannot vote for anything that helps the Affordable Care Act at this point because they all voted against or voted to replace and repeal it literally 60 times. So this is smart politics in terms of getting in the House, because it's never going to actually be a vote in the Senate. And this is probably why Bernie says it's irrelevant to me. I wouldn't vote for it because I'm not going to give any cover to Republicans in any way, and because I'm going to vote for something else. But understand, people have to be very clear on this. The Affordable Care Act covers 20 million people. Half of those people are from expansion of Medicaid. The other half are people who are not eligible for employer-based health care. And those people go into exchanges in states across the country. That's 10 million people. That's a fraction of the people who get health insurance in this country. The Affordable Care Act did not do such a great job in terms of containing costs, and the Republicans have done a very good job of getting rid of those cost controls to the extent that there were any. The best thing the Affordable Care Act was the PPI part, was the PPI part, and that was the patient protections. Now it's things like pre-existing conditions, things like you can't have rescission, you don't have lifetime or yearly caps. If you get super ill and it costs $750,000, they can't get rid of your insurance because you went over your $500,000 lifetime cap or whatever it is. You can be on your parents' program till you're 26. There are certain essential services that make health insurance actually define as health insurance, right? You can't just sell something that says like, well, we're going to pretend like you're covered, and that's health insurance, right?
Use a coupon for contact solution.
Right. You can't sell a car that doesn't have an engine and say it's a car. Yes, it looks like a car, smells like a new car when you get in, but if it doesn't have an engine, it's not really a car.
The film The Rainmaker actually does a great job of illustrating fake door-to-door, fake insurance plans.
Right. So that's basically what it did. So when he says he's going to vote against this, he's basically saying, look, the clown time is over. The ACA certainly was a step in the right direction, but in the final analysis, it did not provide affordable care. That did not happen. And it is highly vulnerable to attack, as we are witnessing right now, just in terms of like executive actions. Continue.
To all do it through public funding, save huge amounts of money in administrative costs. So that's Medicare for all.
Okay, so there's lots of people running on Medicare for all, but there's been some interesting sort of debate about what it means, and there's sort of two different ways that people are talking about it now. One is what you've talked about, a 4-year phase-in, you lower it and you get Medicare for all. The other is the idea of sort of a Medicare buy-in, right? So you don't say everybody's in the Medicare system, you just say everyone has the option to, you can optionally buy in at Medicare rates. That's called Medicare for America. There's a bill with that name in the House. That is polling very well right now, 51 to 30%, whereas the sort of more traditional Medicare for all that you support is even. What do you think about that as an alternative? Why not sort of slide towards the system in an optional way?
Because ultimately we have to recognize that the current system is incredibly dysfunctional and wasteful. Its goal is to make profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies. You are not going to be able, in the long run, to have cost-effective, universal health care unless you change the system, unless you get rid of the insurance companies, unless you stand up to the greed of the drug companies and lower prescription drug costs. That's the only way that you could provide quality care to all people. I look at health care, Chris, the same way as I look at public education, the same way I look at police protection, fire protection. All people get it regardless of their income. It is publicly funded. That is the most cost-effective way to provide health care to all.
Now, we're going to talk to our guest in a minute, and I think she will tell us that there are other options besides a single-payer system and that function around the world. The irony is that the buy-in may be the least efficient that you could have because you do not get the cost savings by having universality within that insurance pool, and you still retain all of the problematic aspects of private insurance. So, it's one thing to have, in my opinion, and we'll talk to our guest about it because she's done a lot of work on this, but it's one thing to have supplementary private insurance. But if you do not have a system that is designed to basically take care of the vast majority of people, like more or less like our public schools do, then you will not get the efficiencies that you need, and you will not have a durable system because it will not function the way it's supposed to. But we will talk to our guest about that in a moment.
Can we appreciate that poll for a second, too? Because that's not a poll of Democrats. That's a poll of everybody, right? So the amount of support for a single-payer system, even among Republicans, is very encouraging.
Yeah, I would want to see the way they phrase those questions because, I had not heard of the American for Medicare Act.
The devil is in the phrasing. I remember being involved in focus groups in my brief brand whatever sort of time, and they're profoundly easy to manipulate. That's all I'll say.
I
like,
just remember being
disturbingly
involved
so.
in focus groups when I was living in Boston, waiting tables and trying to earn $50.
Did you go? Did you go and attend? That's
I used to do all that stuff all
you
the
were
time.
like the most unhelpful focus group participant.
No, there was
imaginable.
everything.
How did
Anything
they
I
let
could
you
get.
in? Just as with a jury,
I would lie.
You should have been thrown out immediately.
I would lie about everything.
Wow. So if anything, the real numbers are even higher than that.
Well, we don't know. But the bottom line is that they're definitely up. The more people hear about it and understand the proposal, the more people appreciate it because, 10 years ago, I don't think these numbers would have been anywhere near there. But, folks, not only is selling single-payer health insurance challenging, hiring is challenging. But there's only one place you can go where hiring is simple, fast, and smart. A place where growing businesses connect to qualified candidates. That place, it's actually online. ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards. But they don't stop there. With their powerful matching technology, or what I call it, their powerful Get Brendan technology, because that's where we got Brendan from. ZipRecruiter scans thousands of resumes to find people with the right experience and invite them to apply to your job. As applications come in, ZipRecruiter analyzes each one and spotlights the top candidates so you never miss a great match. When Brendan came in, let me tell you this, we got Brendan through ZipRecruiter. They were advertising on the show, and I was like, I got to hire somebody. I should try the service out. When Brendan came in, one of the first things he said, and, I don't know how you came through ZipRecruiter. I don't know how they got you or whatnot. First thing he says is like, yeah, no, I know what you do. The last job I was on, I had to block your videos because I was looking for the raw footage of the clips, and your videos kept coming up.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, my God.
Sorry, Brendan.
Hell
Imagine
yeah.
you think you found the raw footage, and all of a sudden, pause it.
Well, but that's the thing. Like, what better fit could I have had? It was like literally like, oh, you're the guy who used to work here yesterday, and now you're coming in for a job today. That happened to me with Bartley's Burgers up in Cambridge, Mass. I left for like 3 weeks, and then they made me apply for the job again. I was there for 4 months before that. They were trying to be dicks. ZipRecruiter is so effective that 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. Right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're talking to Elisabeth Rosenthal about an American sickness. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome the editor-in-chief of Kaiser Health News, a New York Times op-ed contributor, and the author of An American Sickness, How Healthcare Became Big Business and How You Can Take It Back. Elisabeth Rosenthal, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with as luck would have it, the Trump administration makes what I would consider a very dubious political decision, and perhaps an even greater, even more dubious legal decision in weighing in against the U.S. government, I guess, in this Fifth Circuit case regarding the Affordable Care Act. Characterize what the argument is here in that Fifth Circuit and what the implications would be if the plaintiffs prevail.
Well, the argument is that because the penalty for not having insurance was taken away by Congress, then the whole ACA is therefore invalid. That was a crucial kind of leg of the program, and once you've taken that away, the rest of it has to go away too. And I'm not going to think about the politics of that so much as the disaster and the chaos it creates in healthcare, which is my bailiwick.
Okay, and so fair enough. And we should just say, from a legal standpoint, the idea that it would be severable is, the argument would be, well, Congress had the opportunity to repeal the whole ACA. They didn't. They just decided to repeal that part of it. So we know where Congress stands on this. We don't have to assume that they would perceive the whole law to be inseverable, as it were. Okay.
Absolutely, and the administration is of course using its notion of very expanded executive powers to basically go against what Congress has done.
So, okay, with that said, let's just, explain to us what the implications would be. I guess on day one, right, if this case was to prevail, 20 million people would lose their health insurance at least, right? And then the rest of us would be implicated by the patient protections part of the ACA.
Yeah, this will affect everyone, and it's the ACA. I think everyone who's kind of candid about it will say, sure, it has some flaws, which is why we're hearing some of the Dems talk about Medicare-for-all now. But it did really, really important things that the Trump administration has been trying to kind of kneecap it in various ways. But for example, it protected people with pre-existing conditions to be able to get insurance before the ACA. You could be excluded from insurance if in the past, for example, you'd used an asthma inhaler, or you could find out they would consider pregnancy in some plans a pre-existing condition. So that was really important. Another thing is that it was behind the Medicaid expansion through which tens of millions of people got insurance, which was really important. Another thing it did was to standardize plans, to basically make illegal junk insurance plans where you could think, oh, yeah, I have insurance, and then suddenly you go to a hospital and you realize, oh, it's not for emergency room care, or, oh, it doesn't cover pregnancy. So the ACA protected patients. Its full name, we always think about it as the Affordable Care Act, but it was the Affordable Care and Patient Protection Act. Right. It protected all of us in really important ways, and those protections from business abuses, or what I think of as the business abuses that are common in our healthcare system, would basically dissipate instantaneously.
Yeah, that raises a good point. It's one I try to make a lot. The PPACA is the official sort of acronym of the patient protection, and everything you just listed was the patient protection part of the bill. Yet we call it the ACA, and in many respects, I think that's why it was so hard for it. And I know this is not your purview, the politics of it, but I think that was so hard for people to sort of appreciate the bill, because the PP part of it is really a huge leap forward for health insurance. And so,
absolutely.
But let's talk about the cost, because your book is basically breaks down why our healthcare system is so expensive. It is $3 trillion a year that it costs essentially Americans, either out of their pockets or their employers' pockets or out of the government's pockets. We as an American society spend $3 trillion a year, which is which dwarfs just about everywhere. Well, not just about everywhere else, right? I mean, per capita. So
it's the same as the economy of France. That's crazy, isn't it?
It's crazy. And so let's talk about like where do you start in terms of maybe, I guess, if it's possible to do it, but in descending order of where the inefficiency exists that creates this this outsized cost.
Well, in many ways, it's the fact that we've given over healthcare to a market, and it's a highly dysfunctional market. So the conclusion of the book, and what I realized, which I hadn't quite gelled before writing it, was that what's happened in the U.S. is we've allowed business considerations to drive our healthcare, and health is on the back burner. So, what are our values in healthcare? How do we judge healthcare institutions, pharmaceutical companies, device makers, return on investment, efficiency, profit? Well, what are the values of healthcare? They're like caring, curing, talking to people. Those have kind of dissipated. They're on the back burner. And so when we say, hey, we want to get to a place, health reform is about patient-centered, evidence-based care. I mean, what other kind of health care could there be? And I think the answer is in the U.S., it's business-driven, it's profit-driven, and that's a big problem. And I'm not saying you have to, everyone should be Mother Teresa or we should do away with all profit in health care, but I think it's so out of control now, and we see this when we look at the prices in our country compared to the prices in every other country and what all of the members of the healthcare industry have been able to get away with in terms of what they charge. I just did a story looking at insulin pricing. $275 a vial for Humalog in our country, about $50 in Germany, even less in France and England. Now, why is that? Same medicine? Because we trust in the market, and the market, in this case, just hasn't delivered.
Well, all right. So there's so let's talk about that, because you talk in your book about a dynamic where where competition's supposed to kick in, as it were, and it oddly enough, competition kicks in, and all it does is it just sort of like somehow rises the price of everything.
Yeah, there's a phenomenon that's pretty unique to healthcare called sticky pricing, which is a nice term, where basically what happens is there'll be a few competitors in the field, and instead of them kind of competing with each other and driving prices down, one will try to raise the price of a drug or a hospital service, $1,000 or something like that, and the other two will look at each other and go, oh, wow, it worked. They're getting away with it. And so everyone raises their prices. So that's why we've seen, even though there are 3 insulin makers, the insulin prices go up in lockstep, basically, by a factor of about 300% over the last 10 years. And we see the same phenomena all over healthcare, where what is the norm in healthcare? We insurers pay often according to usual and customary prices in an area. Well, guess what? If all the hospitals are charging a lot, then that becomes usual and customary, and so there's no need for anyone to compete. So again, it's a dysfunctional market, in partly because we've let it get that way, and in part because it's hard. You don't shop for healthcare the way you shop for a loaf of bread. You don't, someone tells you where to go. The price isn't transparent. Even if it were, you really don't want to be just choosing the lower price product without being able to judge, is that the best surgery for me or not?
So, I mean, I want to get just stay and be a little sticky on this usual and customary thing, because this does not exist. That like means of pricing does not exist. It seems to me in anywhere else, and that seems like that's like a hard and fast floor, right? So there's no ceiling on any of these prices, but there's like basically an artificial floor that pushes these things up.
Yeah, and why do we think usual and customary is right? I mean, that's the problem, is rational. Because what you find, and what I found in the book, is we say usual and customary by GeoZip. So you can find, a high-priced area in Manhattan where usual and customary for gallbladder surgery would be $30,000, and yet you go into Queens and it's suddenly $5,000. So, usual and customary basically just means how much are the residents in that area willing to pay, and what can you get away with, not like what's a rational price for that procedure.
Where did that term come from? Like, I mean, it just sounds like, it sounds to me like a reasonable person standard that a court would use to determine negligence or something like this. But it sounds like it was just simply developed. I mean, you might know, developed by the medical industry to just sort of say the obvious price. And that's just a function of how much does it cost? How much you got? I mean, that's basically what it is, right?
Well, the problem is, I like to say, how we got to this crazy healthcare system is a tale of, the road to hell is paved in good intentions. So the way we got usual and customary is, for a while there were no rules, right? And for a while in the 70s, 80s, Medicare was just paying, whatever a doctor would charge, they would pay. And then things got really out of control. And at some point they said, we're going to pay usual and customary, because that was lower than whatever, right? But then, of course, if everyone's charging a lot and everyone realized, well, if we all charge a lot, then we all get to charge a lot. And so that's what's evolved. And that's partly why you see these huge price disparities where, an MRI in one city can cost 5 times what it would cost in another. And an MRI might cost 3 times as much on one street in New York than it would 10 blocks away.
So the other dynamic, which I find fascinating, and this is a relatively, I think, recent phenomena, because insurance companies are now, and maybe this was the case state to state, but at least from a federal standpoint, insurers are limited in terms of profits to, I think it's 20% essentially, or I should say that their premiums, 80% of premiums need to go towards providing care for people. So there's an incentive for insurance companies to do the absolute opposite of what we would anticipate for them to do, which is to negotiate prices down, but they actually benefit by prices going up.
Right. A piece of 20% of a big pie is better than 20% of a small pie. And again, that's kind of the road to hell paved in good intentions. What happened before was a lot of insurers were only spending, maybe 60% of premiums on care. And everyone said, oh, that's bad, right? Of course. So you should spend 80 to 85% is what the law says. But no one thought, oh, well, so they're going to respond to that by just paying out a lot more claims to keep their income stable. And I think that's the problem. We assume that healthcare will operate in a way that thinks about the care and about the health. Right. But these are businesses, and they don't. What they're doing is trying to preserve their income, and most will respond in a way that you didn't anticipate because they're not really thinking about, well, you want us to spend our premiums on helping people. They're thinking about, wow, we've got shareholders and we just, we can't have that big drop in income.
To me, that sounds like a kickback, right? It's like, look, I get a 20% VIG on this. So if you want to charge me double the price, great. Right? I mean, that's basically.
Yeah. Well, I think it's.
I don't think that's the way they present it, but I mean that's what it is, right? I mean, it's like I'm not going to haggle with you over the price of this because I'm actually just getting paid commission more or less by the transaction. I mean, it's like almost like the media buyers for political campaigns where they're like, it's too bad these ads are so expensive, but I get 15% of the cost of the ad. So it's that type of thing.
Yeah, I don't like to use the term kickback because that has a rather narrow definition. Right. But I think what I do like to say is, basically everyone's feeding it the trough, and what's in the trough is my and your health, and we're the victims of this, right? So it benefits everyone in the industry to some extent when the prices stay high, because there's a lot more in the trough to eat. Now, I think what the big fallacy that patients need to remember is we always say, like, why would my insurer pay that? My insurer's in my corner. No, they're not. They're a pass-through. They take in premiums and they pay out claims. And, if a claim is particularly egregious, they might fight it on your behalf, but not usually. They're too big to care about you. And this was like an aha moment for me. I had a patient who had an out-of-network claim, and the insurer paid about $120,000 on it, and it was an outrageous claim. And I called the insurer and said, "Why are you paying this?" And they said, "Well, yeah, it's an unjust claim, but we'd have to take the guy to court, and we'd have to put investigators in to see what happened in the operating room. It's just easier to pay." So for individual cases, it's usually easier for them to pay. And they give you, those annoying notes about, like, they charged you $15,000 and we negotiated down on your behalf to $12,000, but the actual price should probably be about $1,000 for a lot of those things. So they're not in your corner. They're businesses.
So the other problem we have, aside from a pharmaceutical industry, which jacks up prices completely untethered to the cost of these things, and there's certain patent protections and whatnot. But we also have the consolidation of hospitals and sort of like what is becoming, I guess, just a series of monopolies in some respects. I think it's fairly obvious. Even with competition, it seems like they raise prices. Without competition, they raise prices. There's no, what's the option there?
Well, and I do think hospitals have gotten off the hook. We tend to focus on, bad pharmaceutical companies, bad insurers. The biggest single spend in our healthcare system is hospital stays, and those prices have gone up basically untethered to anything involving reality. So now everything is billed. It's billed by the minute. If you're in the recovery room, it's being billed by the minute usually, and which really bothers me, because if you're staying in the recovery room for 3 hours, it's not often because you need to be in the recovery room, but because the surgeons are having dinner. But your insurer is paying by the minute in that case. So I think the hospitals deserve a lot more scrutiny in terms of their pricing. And remember, most hospitals in this country are not-for-profit institutions, so they're not even paying taxes. So I think one of the big tests that I see coming in the next few years is looking at these not-for-profit institutions saying, do you look like a big business or do you look like a charity? And if you look like a big business, hell, pay taxes and we'll use that to deliver real health care for people. But I think you're right. We've let them off the hook a little too easily. And hospital consolidation, as you say, we used to blame consolidation on rising prices, but again, when there are only 3 hospitals in a town and they're all getting away with it, they almost don't have to be consolidated to all look at each other and go, oh, usual and customary, $100,000, it's fine with all of us.
Okay, so you lay out in the book. So we have these major problems, and I guess the other problem too is implicit in what we've already said, and what you make explicit in the book is that outcomes. Although there are some fixes in the ACA that sort of implicate this a little bit, and maybe you can describe those. But outcomes are secondary, right? Like we get paid, they make money on procedures. They make money on providing care as opposed to providing a specific outcome. And we're not talking just about an individual, we're talking about just like broadly speaking, right? This is one of the few, at least it seems to me, attempts at control of the system in some way by saying we're going to judge your outcomes versus how much care you give.
Yeah, and you know, outcomes research in healthcare is really complicated, right? Because how do you define the outcomes? So yes, there have been attempts to do that. I think they're deeply flawed because, you know, big hospitals will say, well, we have sicker patients, so our outcomes aren't as good. I think really that's why people are looking more at what we call bundled care or capitated care, or something like Medicare-for-all, a single-payer system, where, you know, you are given as an institution a bundle of money for doing something, whether it's the entire care or an appendectomy or heart surgery, and you have to use that money wisely and well. So I think the outcomes world, you know, it's important to focus on it. We deserve, as consumers of healthcare, to know about outcomes, but I don't think it's going to be the solution, because I think, you know, the truth is that almost every hospital in the U.S. is going to do an appendectomy just fine, and MRIs are the same everywhere. So, but prices are really different. So even before we get to outcomes research, I think we have to say an MRI is an MRI is an MRI, a vitamin D test is a vitamin D test, and prices shouldn't vary. And that's what every other country has done. They've said, here are some standards, and everyone needs to follow them.
Okay, I want to just jump to that. I just want to just, in terms of outcomes, like, so things like how many infections, you know, in-hospital infections do you get? I mean, I think most people, I don't know if most people are aware that, like, being in the hospital is a really, like, dangerous place to be on some level.
Yeah.
In terms of for your health. I mean, that's the irony. Like, have those proven effective in any way? Like, for instance, if we were to say, okay, here's bundled care, right? We're going to give you've got a patient who comes in with a burst appendix, or you got a patient who comes in with, you know, some type of heart troubles. We're going to check on the menu, and this is worth $10. This is worth $50. How do we assess that they're not going like, you know, one of the ways that we can make this $50 into, you know, feel like $60 in terms of like our profit is, we just we're going to pull back on some of the stuff.
The worry is always about skimping, right?
Right.
The one way to spend less is to skip on care. And I think some really interesting experiments have been done on that. One is something called reference pricing, where some big California organizations said, what does it cost to do a hip or knee replacement? And they went to some economists at Berkeley and said, we don't want the bottom dwellers. We want a reasonable cost that we're going to pay. And they arrived at something like $43,000. And they said, okay, that's what we're going to pay. And you patients, you can find, you know, if you find a hospital that comes in for that, we'll pay. If you go above, you're going to pay. And they did two really interesting things. First of all, it encouraged patients to look around at those hospitals that would do it for $43,000. But the really more interesting thing it did for me is that it encouraged those hospitals that were charging $120,000 to say, oh yeah, we could do it for $43,000. So, you know, I think it's partly you can't do bottom dwelling, right? You don't want to pick the cheapest health care you can find, but you can do, you know, I think one interesting thing is, you know, what about a target of health care where I say I don't care about the amenities, the bells and whistles, but I care about just the fundamentals of good care. That doesn't exist in the U.S., and that's what healthcare looks like in most of the rest of the world, like no five-star hotels, no fountains, you know, maybe not a private room, but just the basics, and that's really what we should be focused on.
All right, well, let's talk about, well, you know, the different ways of getting there, because, you know, when I hear like, oh, you're getting, you know, you as a patient go out and when I as an insurance company is going to tell you, you're going to get $43,000, go out and find a hospital that, you know, you will cost you $43,000 to do this, or you're going to pay more. And that's, you know, it would be completely unreasonable if it was for a heart attack, right? Like, I mean, obviously I don't have the time to shop around, but even when I do have time to shop around, right? Like, isn't that a cost that's associated with, like, I have to go and spend my time finding like a good place. Like it's one thing, if I want to go buy a TV, and even now it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I want to get a good deal on a TV. It's worth it for me. But for healthcare, like, should I really have to have that kind of savvy and expend that type of energy to get the best price for my hip replacement?
Well, the simple answer is, of course not. This is a terrible burden to put on patients who are sick. But in our current system, I don't think it should be our endpoint. But in our current system, it's important to do, partly because it will save you money, and partly because it sends signals to the providers that we're not going to take this anymore. Now, and the companies that do this and do it well will say, here are all the hospitals in our state that will do it for this amount, and we'll compile a list to make it easy. And I think companies have been a bit asleep at the wheel in helping their employees so-called shop for health care. Ultimately, I do think we shouldn't have to shop for health care personally, that I think, that's a terrible position to put patients who are ill in, particularly if they have a more acute illness. Now, you can argue a knee replacement or a hip replacement. People do have the time to shop around. They often do call a bunch of different surgeons and hospitals. And if your employer says, here are all the ones that will do it for $43,000, it's not that hard to do.
So, all right. So, what kind of system should we go to that would be more efficient? Because there's obviously a big problem with cost controls here, and so what are the different models where you could get cost controls that would be durable, that would be effective and be durable?
Right. I think, the one thing you can say is we have no way to control costs and prices in our system. And different countries, I'm a journalist, it's a political decision what we choose, but I think if you look around the world, countries either do something like a single-payer system where you get big bargaining power because you have a single payer who can say, that drug's not worth it, that the price you're charging us for that hospital stay is not worth it. So that works. And by the way, single-payer systems, some of them do maintain a private insurance market for people who want to pay for more or for more amenities. You could also go to what countries like Switzerland and Germany have done, which is and Belgium, to have price setting, price regulation. You either say this is what this procedure or this implant is worth and this is what we'll pay, or you say here's the ceiling, the maximum, and you can compete under it. So there are other ways to do it, but we do none of the above. And of course, we're not even really thinking of any of the above, except in the plans where people are talking about maybe allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. That would be a start of moving in that direction. But I will note that all of the kind of fixes we're talking about in the ACA, none of those really address the pricing issue. What they do is they try and insulate patients from the cost, but that's really hard to do until you head-on face the fact that we pay between 2 and 10 times as much for the exact same things, medical encounters, as people do in the rest of the world.
So, all right. So let me ask you this. I mean, because I'm sensitive to the fact that you don't want to make a, you don't want to,
I'd have to quit if I said this is what I think we should do.
Well, right. No, that's fine, and I respect that as a reporter. That makes some sense. But in terms of the types of countries that are able to have a price control regime versus the nature of the societies that have a single payer, right? Like, because what culturally speaking, one may be easier to implement than another,
right,
in different cultures, right? And I mean, we certainly and going from the type of system that we have to a regime of price controls, because one of the problems that we have in this country, it seems to me, is that we don't even have an apparatus to have a federal price control system, do we? I mean, because it's so fragmented.
Well, we do a version of it for electricity, for example. You could regulate health prices as you would a utility. I don't think we'll go there personally, but what I say in the book is that we will find a system, or we need to find a system that respects our cultural preferences, our medical system as it exists today, and our kind of, whatever is our kind of funky American bias about independence and choice and individualism. But, I don't think we're that exceptional from the rest of the world when it comes to health care. People want health care. They need health care. They need insurance. This narrative of, we respect individualism, and if someone doesn't want to buy insurance, they shouldn't have to. I'm out around the country speaking about this stuff all the time, and I can tell you people want health insurance. They just can't afford it in this country. They add up the $800 a month premium, and then the deductibles and the co-payments and the out-of-network charges, and it adds up to, 20-25% of their family's disposable income, and they make a choice to say, I'd rather be able to send my kid to college. And so I think we need to take that barrier away, and I do think we'll develop a system that respects all of our preferences, but now, we like choice, but hey, the one we choose is not in our network, and we don't really get to choose anyway.
Right. Well, I was going to say, what do we mean by when we want choice, right? Because, let me ask you this. How would price controls versus a single payer, would there be a difference in those two scenarios as to, choice being limited?
Well, with price controls, Germany, for example, has hundreds of insurers. I would note they're all not-for-profit, really not-for-profit. So you have your choice there, right?
Well, you have your choice of insurer. You have your choice of insurers. But I'm saying, really, nobody cares about choosing insurance as much as they want to choose what doctor they see, right?
Right, but if you're right, but in the German system, for example, all the doctors participate in all the plans, so you can go see what doctor. I mean, we have this notion that if you go to a single payer or a more regulated system, you won't be able to make those choices. You can. Of course you can. What is somewhat different is there is a sense of, particularly in a single payer system, you may have to wait longer, right? If it's a non-urgent issue, you may have to wait longer. Now, what I will tell people when they say that is, I don't want to have to wait. I'll say, try and find mental health care in New York City. Your wait will be infinite if you want to go in network. We have waits here. We just don't acknowledge them. And I think, so there's a lot of fear-mongering that goes on around, a price-controlled system, both in the medical community and in the patient community. A lot of even bigger fear-mongering that goes into what would happen in a single-payer system. There will be differences. There will be certain kinds of weights, but generally in terms of physician choice, which is what we tend to focus on, there's a lot of choice, and probably more than you have in the average narrow network plan in the U.S. now.
Right, single payer, I would assume, right? Like everybody. I mean, even if you had, you had doctors working outside of that system, ultimately there would be more people available to most people under a single payer. More doctors would be available under a single payer, right? To most people.
Right. I think the doctors, you would have more choice. There might be certain kinds of treatment that in a single payer system they decided had not been scientifically proven to a point that they were willing to pay for it.
Right.
So there would be places around the edges where you might get a certain kind of advanced care quicker in the U.S. Now, the caveat to that is it's not necessarily better care, because in the U.S. you can sell things that sound good that haven't been proven as much.
Right. All right. So let me ask you this. Also, from a purely reportorial perspective, we're talking about two different regimes here. One is a price control regime, maintaining, I guess, a bunch of, insurance companies, although the example of that is where they're all nonprofit, and I don't know that we actually have real nonprofit or that many in this country. But presuming we could get there. And then on the other hand, we have a single payer, which provides the cost controls because you have a single payer who is, instead of, theoretically, there's a certain redundancy between those two plans, right? Because you would have to set up some type of governmental agency that makes the assessment of what each procedure is worth, right? To make it uniform. So what of this opt-in to a single-payer type of system or opt-in to Medicare? Because that to me seems well, let me ask you this. That to me seems like it would be incredibly inefficient because you wouldn't get the benefit of price controls for at least a large percentage of the care. And to the extent that you get price controls in the system that people opt into, a lot of, it seems to me, hospitals would jump out of that system because they want to be in the sort of more Wild West system. Yeah. Well,
first of all, no hospital can opt out of Medicare because they get Medicare dollars for doctor training. You can't survive as a hospital without Medicare. So I think that opt-out is not going to happen. But I would like to point out you can also have price controls with private for-profit insurers too, where you just peg price controls to Medicare rates. You say we're going to pay 200% of Medicare, and insurers can decide if they can accept that or not. But I think that is a third option, and maybe the one we'll go to. But in terms of the opt-in to a public, what's called a public option, either opting into Medicare or opting into Medicaid, some states are experimenting with. It's an interesting procedure because basically what it does is it allows people who can't find plans they like on the exchanges or through their employer to say, you know what, I'm going to pay premiums to Medicare. And it does two things that are interesting. First of all, it gives people an option, a public option. And second of all, it says to all the kind of half-baked, kind of crappy commercial plans out there, you have to be at least as good as Medicare or people are going to desert you in droves. And the thing is, to have price controls, to have big negotiating power, you don't really have to have a full single-payer plan. Medicare is such a huge insurer, as is Medicaid in the states, that they do have negotiating power if they want to use it. So, for example, with prescription drugs, if Medicare was allowed to negotiate pricing, my bet is very quickly a whole bunch of insurers would say, okay, we'll pay what Medicare pays plus 10% or something like that. So at least you have a somewhat rational yardstick by which we could judge prices, which is what we totally lack now. So would it be perfect? No, but I think we're now at the phase of our dysfunctional health system where we're looking for perfect, where like, hey, we're spending 19% of our GDP. Let's just get it down to 17%. We're not aiming for 12% like France. We're just aiming to turn this ship around.
Elisabeth Rosenthal, the book is An American Sickness, How Healthcare Became Big Business and How You Can Take It Back. We didn't get into sort of like almost like the sort of the nuts and bolts things that people can do today when they're faced with these prices that are but a very sort of a practical guide as well as sort of the big picture. So we will.
Well, I'm happy to come talk about that because I think there's lots people can do and should do because we as patients, the patients, are not sending signals to the system if we just write the checks and say, oh, what can I do? You can do stuff.
Well, we will put a link to that book at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Going to take a quick break, head into the fun half. But first, I want to remind you, the Majority Report is supported by Pitchfork Economics with Nick Hanauer, a weekly podcast that explores why rising income inequality will lead to pitchforks and what we can do about it. Every week, Hanauer is joined by some of the world's most original economic thinkers in a convention-busting exploration of who gets what and why in the American economy. If you want to learn how to make the economy work for all Americans, Subscribe to Pitchfork Economics at pitchforkeconomics.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, if you want to support this program, become a member. Go to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only support the free show, we give you extra content every day. So check it out, jointhemajorityreport.com. As always, if you cannot afford it, we will not have your finances lock you out of the fun half. Everyone deserves fun, even if you ain't got a couple of bucks in your pocket. So send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Wait what seems like an eternity for us to get to our emails, but we will get there, and we will hook you up. Jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY. Get 10% off. It's great coffee, great company. Last night was Tuesday night, so the Michael Brooks show happens. Why don't you guys go Michael and then Jamie and then Matt while I run to the boys' room?
Gladly.
Jeez. Last night on TMBS, we had Francesca Fiorentini, and we talked about AIPAC. Then a conversation with Matt Taibbi around some of the kind of, I would say, a broader political and media conversation around the failings of the Russia story and why they matter and how we could kind of reorient to a more systemic understanding of where we're at now. And a Rachel Maddow cold open. This weekend, illicit history of redlining and a case for reparations with Marissa Barara-Darin. Patreon.com/TMBS, Michael Brooks Show on YouTube and iTunes. Thanks, everybody.
All right. This week on the Antifada, I think I've got some time, so I'm just going to read the whole description. Third-time guest, Niril Shah. This is our first ever third-time guest for those keeping track.
We're only halfway through.
He jumps in to help us bang through some recent cancellations. Rachel Maddow, Barbara Streisand, the International Socialist Organization, and Great Britain as a viable, insane, bourgeois democratic state. Since we couldn't get any limeys to come in and talk UK politics, we have to yank-splain what the hell is happening on the other side of the world and answer questions not limited to but including, why is a Brexit? What's at stake in this slow-motion train wreck for Corbyn and the left? How come, as Jordan Peterson would say, the whole thing is crazy? As usual, it's the political economy, stupid. So check it out. Patreon.com/TheAntifada or anywhere free podcasts are sold. Although you can sign up to give us money if you want.
Literary hangover. It's going to be a week and a half until the Oscar Wilde episode everyone's waiting for comes out. But you can catch up with the back catalog. We did a King Philip's War. If you don't know what that is, you should. There's some Massachusetts people in here that don't know their...
I didn't know it. I was embarrassed, and I listened
crazy?
to it, and it's an insane story.
Yeah, so check that out. Check it out on YouTube. Go subscribe to the YouTube page, Literary Hangover. Check that out.
I had a lot of coffee this morning in an attempt to keep myself awake.
You don't drink those horrible energy drinks anymore, though, right?
What do you mean?
You used to drink like 24-hour energy and stuff.
No, I did not.
Or 5-hour energy?
Okay.
Oh, man.
I recall
used to
you
be
did. No.
Red Bull.
Oh,
you
every
tried
once
it.
in a
You
while.
tried it. It wasn't
I
like
tried,
a daily thing.
No.
I know it wasn't a daily thing.
I
Do
think,
you still do that, though?
No, I mean, I think I probably had those 5-hour energy drinks maybe like 10 times over the course of 5 or 6, 7 years.
I have a story about those.
Yeah.
I was in the Issues of Death and Grief class in college, and it was like we were watching this documentary about people jumping from the San Francisco Bridge. It was very dark, but we were watching it on Hulu for the class. And in the middle of a very dark moment in that movie, Hulu goes to commercial, and the ad is like, you know that 4:30 feeling, and it's like, damn, we got to worry about these ad placements on some of this stuff.
No, I never. I mean, every now and then I'll, like if I'm really in big trouble. Back when Saul
I was honestly,
I
know you didn't do it that much, but I was just going to note a positive that I haven't seen those in a while.
Oh,
and
no,
I thought that was a good sign.
No.
Half
that
the
even with the
time-
pipes and Saul and everything, you're still not
No.
hitting those. That's good.
No.
Half the time when you talk about your kids, it makes me want to have a baby right away. And the other half, it makes me want to check to make sure my IUD is still in place.
I was going to say then you're not listening carefully enough because I think probably should be closer to
95.
Probably like 10
I
to
feel like you say the nice
95%.
parts off the air. And you say the mean parts
of
on
the
the
time
air.
you talk about your kids, I think, Jesus, that sounds absolutely horrible. And 5% of the time, I think, if I had enough alcohol and could be just sort of passive enough and there was a lot of additional care to support it happening, maybe this is swingable.
Oh, that's actually both my children's middle name. What
additional
you just said.
care.
No, what you just said, like passive enough and enough alcohol, that's actually their middle names. All right, folks.
Which is which? No, don't say
Same.
that.
We named them both the same middle name. See you in the fun half. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.